Hello and welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you all here for the third season of our Day One and Beyond series. Today, we are kicking off the series with the first session and we'll be back same time every other Tuesday till the end of this year. These sessions will take you through the series of topics and activities related to understanding Oracle Cloud and building out on Oracle Cloud. Day One and Beyond is hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for customers and end users. If you haven't already, I invite you to create a free account on Cloud Customer Connect, join in discussions, ask questions, and look for upcoming events on various topics. My name is Renu Bhatt. I'm a technical program manager with the Customer Enablement team. And today I'm joined by Larry Busselet, Senior Manager, Technical Program Management. Before I hand it over to Larry, a quick reminder to use the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen for any questions throughout the session. Time permitting, we'll have a Q&A session at the end as well. And, the session is being recorded and we'll have the replay posted on the forums and on YouTube. So if your colleagues or friends who haven't been able to make it today, or if you want to share this with them later, you can use the recording links that we'll share with you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Larry. Larry, please take it away.
Thanks, Renu. Welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to having another great training session started this next quarter for this. I am joined today with a couple members of my team and also another expert in the industry. So we have Joey Hall, Olivia Furta, and Creighton Swinks with us. They're going to take you through our technical quick start. Our Day One and Beyond track is something that we started a while ago, and this is something that we're looking forward to keeping this going and bringing other topics in. So look for other special topics that are going to be coming out. We're going to start having more of these each month. So it's something that we're going to be continuing to build on this. And we do also put these on Cloud Customer Connect, and we also have pre-done sessions that you can find on the webinar link that was sent out. So you'll be able to see some previous sessions that were done on other topics like zero trust security, networking topics, all of that. But we have some experts coming in to help us with this series. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Joey to take it away for this session. I'll be on the Q&A along with Creighton and others to kind of help you out in this journey. So thank you all.
Thank you for the introduction, Larry. As you mentioned, my name is Joey Hall. I am a cloud engineer on the customer enablement team. And today we will be going through the first session of Day One Beyond, and that is the Oracle Cloud Technical Quick Start. So what this session is really to help provide you with the proper foundation for moving forward into the next couple of sessions. It's good if you're just starting out with cloud and don't have a lot of experience. It's also good if you have experience with some other clouds and are maybe familiar with or want to know more about how OCI works and get some of the mappings with our terms and definitions there. So today I will be doing this presentation with two of my colleagues, Olivia Furta and Creighton Swank, if you'd like to introduce yourselves as well.
Thanks, Joey. Hi, everyone. This is Olivia Furta. I'm also a cloud engineer on the customer enablement team, and I look forward to today's session.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Creighton Swank. I'm a field CTO aligned with the Manufacturing and Transportation Organization. Looking forward to help kind of carry the torch and show the art of the possible on the OCI Cloud platform.
All right, thank you both. So the goal of this session is, by the end, we want you to have the foundational knowledge needed to begin building in your tenancy. So we're going to give you an overview of a lot of the major cloud services within OCI. We're going to get into the console a little bit. We're going to walk through IAM, building out users, groups, policies, giving you an introduction there, and also look at provisioning an instance to show you how that process works. And at the end, feel free to ask questions as we go along, but feel free at the end, we're going to discuss those as well. So we will make sure to touch upon what we can throughout this presentation with the time that we have at the end. Now, to start off, we like to begin at a high level and discuss the shared responsibility model. So this really details the split between the responsibility of the cloud provider and for the customer at each level of cloud service. So as you go through the stack from left to right here, less responsibility is going to be placed on the customer to manage specific components, and more is going to be responsible, be the responsibility of the cloud provider. In this case, that will be Oracle Cloud. So right here, traditionally on-premise, you are responsible for everything from the physical layer all the way up to user access and identity. Whereas for each of the service levels we have here on the right, you have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, with each level being more and more handled by Oracle. So this is just something to keep in mind as we go through the presentation today, when we go through each of the services, knowing that this is a joint effort depending on the type of service, and each service will have a different level of manageability involved. And as there's going to be a trade-off between customization at the lower level versus manageability at the higher level.
So Joey, can you give me a couple examples of each of these layers? What does this look like in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure or OCI?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different services that can fit into any of these categories. Just for example, in the infrastructure as a service layer, you could have our compute service. So you could be provisioning a virtual machine instance as an example for there. And with something like a virtual machine, you have a lot of customization in something like shape and image. You get to choose the network that you would like to deploy that in. So you will have a lot of customization available to you. But again, you will have less of that management being handled by Oracle. So that's going to be more of your responsibility versus, let's say, platform as a service. You have something like the Oracle Analytics platform, or lots of developer services that could help you build out some of those applications. And then at software as a service, you'd have something like those Fusion SaaS applications that you're probably familiar with, like ERP or HCM.
Yeah, another great example of that is also like object storage, right? Like you don't manage the replication or redundancy of the data. You just manage the security of the data, the policy, and who can access it.
Exactly. So just, again, shared responsibility model. So depending on the service, it'll depend on what you will have the opportunity to manage or have be managed for you. So going in here, looking specifically at Oracle Cloud, we have a lot of different services that you have at your disposal. And these are all really just tools that you can use to solve a problem for your particular use case, and you can utilize Oracle Cloud for that. So we have many different categories here, from developer services, applications, analytics to help you get insights from those applications. The presentation today will focus a lot on core infrastructure here at the bottom. We'll talk a bit about database, the different levels of offerings, and when and why you would use each of them. And then we will also touch upon governance and administration a bit on the right here. So we'll talk about security, we'll talk about IAM, we'll look at some of the different monitoring tools and automation that you'll have at your disposal. And then at the very bottom, depending on use a commercial region, maybe you have certain requirements that make it necessary to utilize one of our government regions. Maybe you need to have some workloads that need to remain on-premise and you want to utilize cloud at customer or other type of hybrid solution, or even work with other clouds with a multi-cloud solution. All of these tools are really there to help you solve that problem and build out the environment that you need.
Yeah, and the thing I like to kind of talk about, especially with respect to this slide, is kind of on the left and right, you've got inherent guardrails, right? So developer services give you the ability to deploy and manage your resources programmatically through things like Terraform. You've got, pipelines and things of that nature to do code development and promotion. And then everything is sort of also protected by the governance and security that's built into the cloud platform itself.
Great observation, Creighton. Like the two on the side, right? That helps control and automate everything in the middle there. So yeah, great to think of those both as guardrails for each of the services that you deploy.
So you have different services like autonomous database, you have Apex for low code development. How do some of these services work together in an environment? Do you have an example or kind of speak more to that?
Yeah, so because there are tons of services here that can be working together in a very large combinations of ways, but we do have an example architecture that we will go over here in a second to show you what some of these things look like in an environment and how they would work together. So if we look at that here, this is a company called Vision Corp. This is a company that we use within our demonstrations to give examples of how some of these services actually do work together. So here throughout the presentation, you're going to see a lot of components here on the screen, but we're going to slowly build these out as we talk about each service through this technical quick start, and then you can get that visual example on how these fit together here.
And Joey, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different components in this setup. Is there a tool that helps you automate the provisioning of this infrastructure?
There is indeed. So within OCI, we have a tool called Resource Manager, as you can see in the top left here, and that will actually help you deploy different infrastructure resources utilizing Terraform scripts. So if you have certain architectures, you can even go into our architecture center, for example, and that will have a lot of architectures similar to this, and you can utilize the Terraform scripts there to quickly deploy those that you find within the architecture center within your own OCI tenancy to make it pretty easy to do that. So now that we talked about generally what services are offered and a quick example of what that could look like, where could you actually deploy OCI? What locations can you start to build out these solutions for you and your organization? So here we have the concept of regions, and those are just the locations where you can deploy Oracle Cloud. And right now we have 40 regions, that is 32 commercial, 5 commercial on the way. There are 7 government regions that you have access to. So that's within the US, as you can see, and in Europe on the map here, the 2 blue ones. And then we also have 11 Microsoft Azure Interconnect regions. So that will allow you to do workloads that span both Oracle Cloud and Microsoft Azure. So if you need to run applications on Azure and database within Oracle, within those regions that have the Azure Interconnect, you can actually run those workloads together. So lots of different areas in which you can deploy here.
And why would someone choose to maybe deploy in one region like Chicago versus another region?
So typically you would want to deploy resources in the region that is closest to where they are most likely to be used. And that could be for latency purposes and so on. But you also might have certain restrictions in terms of where you can deploy based off of compliance. Maybe you have certain regulations that require you to make data reside only within a certain country, for example. So that's another consideration that you might need. And you also could use multiple regions. So if you wanted to do disaster recovery, for example, to make sure that your application will still be resilient in terms of any natural disaster, for example, then you could utilize multiple regions. So it just depends on the type of use case, but there's several different things you can keep in mind when picking a region. And going into a bit of behind the scenes of a region, regions are comprised of what are called availability domains. And availability domains are basically just Oracle data centers where you will physically be hosting these resources or services. So these availability domains are going to be connected in a predictable and low latency, high speed encrypted interconnect. So those are physically connected and they're separated by fairly large distances, not as large as between regions, but large enough to not be likely to fail at the same time. So those are kind of comprising what the region is made up of.
So for this region, I see that there are 3 availability domains on here. Is that always the case? Are you always going to have 3 availability domains?
So many of the regions have 3 availability domains, but as we go about expanding and developing new regions, some of these regions will have a single availability domain, for example. But once that region is established and we want to expand and have more capacity, new availability domains can be added as well. But if you're worried about, let's say, high availability, or you want still some separation with your resources, each availability domain has what are called fault domains, which are just physical separations of hardware within that availability domain. And those are separated in terms of power and cooling. So they are unlikely to fail in terms of like a hardware failure, or maybe there's a maintenance event. You can still have that separation within the availability domains as well.
Yeah, it's really about protecting against component failure, right? So, obviously the farther out you go, the more protection you have, but fault domains provide, ultimate protection against PDU failures and traditional data center faults, right?
Exactly. So the physical network that we were just talking about and that Creighton mentioned there as well, to help prevent against those hardware failures, and has that connection, that physical connection, to allow these services to communicate between each other. You also have the virtual network on top of that, and that will help you really leverage and utilize all of these services in parallel and be able to have it available to you in a very performance and secure fashion through this concept of off-box network virtualization. So if we go into our example here, let's say you are a user or an employee at Vision Corp, and you are going to begin your journey within OCI. By doing that, you start with what is called an OCI tenancy. So this string of letters here, this is the tenancy for our demo tenancy, and this is the tenancy that our Vision Corp employee is going to have access to it. So it's the account that your organization will be utilizing to start provisioning OCI resources. And because Vision Corp is headquartered on the East Coast, we are going to be utilizing Ashburn as the home region here. And within Ashburn, there are 3 availability domains, but for our use case here, we'll be utilizing 2 of them just to ensure a little bit of high availability within our architecture here. So from those 3 components, this is how we'll start to build that out within this architecture.
And does this Vision Corp user need certain permissions to be able to access these resources in OCI?
Yes, they do. So once the users within OCI are provisioned, right, you'll have part of the identity and access management piece of OCI. You'll have certain permissions that need to be granted to users and groups. So the users will be added to a group, and we'll touch upon that in a second. And that those groups will be given access to these resources depending on what they're looking to do. And there's different levels of that you can set up. And that's all part of the layered security approach within OCI. So you can see here, just mentioned identity and access management. That is really a core component of security, and it's going to be prevalent across the layers within OCI. So as you can see, it spans the bottom here. But within that, right, we have different layers that security is also built into, and several services that you can utilize within each of these as well. So you have data security that you need to be aware of. You have compute security, ways you can secure your compute instances through things like certificates or management of keys. You have networking. There's a lot of different components of networking that you can utilize to really strengthen your security posture and the way you set up your networking architecture. There are a lot of monitoring and prevention tools that you can utilize to look at your tenancy from a high level, right? You can see what's happening with in your tenancy. How do I prevent certain things from happening? How do I react when different things come up, right? That's all in that monitoring and prevention piece. And then you have different tools you can utilize at the very front of your environment, the internet and edge pieces. So something like the web application firewall to prevent against a lot of those malicious or unwanted internet attacks. So really large set of services that you can and should utilize when building out your environment.
So given all these different services, what are some, major considerations that you should be thinking about, when you're considering, which security service to use?
Yeah, a lot of things that you should take into account. I think you really need to be aware that this is a layered approach. It's a layered defense. So you want to make sure that you have not only reactive controls in place, but you also want to have preventative and detective controls. So you have to make sure that we want to prevent things from happening in the first place. We all want to be able to react and see what's happening within the tenancy. And we also want to take advantage of some of the automation tools that we have at our disposal. So some of these security responses that you'll see later on can be automated. We'll get into our security quick start, and we can show you how some of those different things can work. Creighton, View, from your experience in the industry, are there any certain things that you see that you suggest to customers to be aware of when thinking about their security strategy?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of benefits to turning things on in the beginning. It's very hard to go back and retrofit. So, on our cloud platform, things are encrypted by default, so you don't really have to make those choices. But it's often easier to get all of the foundational sort of security bits set up in the beginning. So things like audit logs, make sure they're injected into your SEM tool. Things like, write ID federation, so getting it upstream to your IDP, making sure that you write policies based on, kind of the access that's required for users or, API integrations to have minimal access. So always start small and then scale up as needed, because starting, kind of broad with, well, let's just give everybody admin access. really makes it hard to roll that back in the long run. So, I think the other thing that customers struggle a lot with is when you move from an on-premise data center to a cloud-based network environment, it's a different structure, right? There's no longer, moats and alligators that keep people out of your data centers. It becomes easier for a misconfiguration to accidentally expose things. So the other advice that I give to customers as they're starting this off is, trust but verify. So put policies in place and write permissions in such a way that prevents users from being able to do that. But there's no harm in setting up an automated event that would look for, oh, this just scheduled or set up an external IP address that we weren't expecting. Alert someone on that, or potentially set up automation to remediate it. Because again, getting that in place in the beginning keeps the guardrails in place from a user perspective to make sure that, people expect that that sort of thing will happen. It's very, very hard to roll that back once you've moved down into production.
Exactly. Great advice there. And just going off of what you said, starting small with some of those basic components, one of those being compartments, right? So you have compartments that are that logical grouping of resources within your tenancy that you're going to utilize as kind of that basic structure for building out security with an OCI from that identity and access management standpoint. So here we have our company Vision Corp, and you have that root compartment. That's going to be the highest level parent compartment within your tenancy. And then Vision Corp has a bunch of teams within there, right? You have the marketing team, the finance team, the IT team or information services team. And each of those could have their own compartment structure that you could set up depending on what type of setup you think is best for your company and their security requirements. So here we have it set up by team, and within that team, we have the different sections of resources for our application build-outs within IT. And you can see when we deploy those services, right, they're going to sit within these compartments. These are logical groupings. And then certain groups will be given access to those resources through those policies. So these little icons here with the hammer, those are going to represent policies attached to these compartments for these groups to access.
Yeah, and Joey, this is something that a lot of customers struggle with, especially if they come from a cloud platform like AWS, where, kind of the way, and we even had a question on this in the Q&A, the way that customers deal with IAM blast radius, so absolutely be 100% certain that user A can't access something that user B can, is typically an AWS account, right? Because that's kind of the ultimate blast radius protection from an IAM segmentation. And so you end up with creating multiple accounts, and that's where things like organizations come into play, and landing zones and control tower to kind of help manage that. In our case, you can certainly do that, and we have organizational structures, and there are very valid reasons why in some cases you want to create multiple tenancies. But the blast radius is absolute here with respect to compartments. So you can still prevent that unintentional access with compartments. And so typically, customers come in and they say, well, we need to spin up a production tenancy and a QA tenancy and these tenancies, and then we have these lines of business and all that. Many, many times that can be done with compartments. And so that's always something I like to lead with when we start building out a tenancy.
Right. So you don't need to have multiple tenancies within that. You can utilize compartments for that organizational structure and provide those guardrails for your security posture. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And this is a quick diagram to show you how this policy attachment process works. We'll do this in the console, so I'll go through this pretty quickly. But the concept here, you have a user that gets added to a group, and that group is referenced in a policy here on the right to get a certain level of access to a compartment. So we'll have policy syntax, I'll show you in a second, and that will let you know what level of security is, what level of access is going to be required for that action. And one thing to note within OCI is that everything is deny by default. So all of our policies are going to be allow based. So I'm going to allow this group to do something, otherwise they cannot do that action. And here, just real quickly, you have groups, which are comprised of your actual users, but you also have this concept of dynamic groups utilizing instances. So it'll allow instances to make something like API calls or take actions with other instances within OCI. And it's a similar process to doing that with users and groups, but you'll be using matching rules for it instead of doing kind of this policy setup that we have coming up next.
So I see users and groups for OCI, but what if I currently have my own users and groups within my company that I want to bring into OCI? How would I do that?
So you do that through the federation process. So if you're using anything that is I think SAML 2.0 compliant identity provider, there's going to be a mapping process that you'll go through to federate that identity provider into use with OCI. And we can show you that in the console. So here, one example, two examples of a policy, right? You have a user added to group A, user added to group B. That policy is attached to an associated compartment. And here you can see what that syntax looks like. So we're allowing group A to do something, in this case, manage compute instances in that compartment. So once that policy references that group, users in that group can now take the action specified there. And then if that's attached, right, policies are either attached at the tenancy root or compartment level, and where you attach it defines who can modify or delete it. And then the last piece before we hop into the console real quick for a demonstration, we're going to look at a couple of the different monitoring and management tools that you can use within OCI. So this is to give you an idea of what's happening within your tenancy. How can I be notified of things that are happening within the tenancy? And then how can I take action upon those things through either getting the notification and going in and doing that action yourself, or setting up some kind of automated action that you can utilize through this as well. So monitoring, that's going to give you a lot of different metrics about different aspects of your OCI environment. So it gives you access to some of those critical insights into your infrastructure workloads. Logging, lots of different aspects of logging. You could do service logs, audit logs. There are VCN flow logs as well, different custom application logs that you can set up. So many different sections there. And then notifications and alarms. Those you could do notifications through email, Slack, PagerDuty, other third-party applications. This can also be integrated with the event service. So we talked about some of those automated actions. So based off of things that happen in your tenancy, you could utilize the event service or functions to take some of those actions as well for you. And then we mentioned Resource Manager earlier, but it fits into this category. You can also utilize Resource Manager to do some of those automated infrastructure deployments to make that process easier as well. And with that, we will look at Vision Corp and see where these services kind of sit within your environment here. So all of these are going to monitor things and take action upon things across your tenancy. So we're having that sit outside here. So you have identity and access management, Resource Manager. CloudGuard is a security tool that will be monitoring, reacting to things within your tenancy. And then you have WAF as well. It's going to sit at the front of your applications for security purposes as well. And then you have auditing, notifications, and events that we just talked about in the previous slide. So that's all sitting within our architecture here as well. And now I will hand this over to Olivia, if you would like to walk us through users, groups, and policies.
Thank you, Joey. All right, so once you've logged into the OCI console, this is what the homepage is going to look like. So a lot of the services that you're going to be working with are going to be located right here. So from networking, database, all these different services. But before I dive into that, especially if you're looking to get started in OCI and get more hands-on experience, I just want to highlight a tool that you can use. It's called Live Labs, and we have all these different, workshops or labs that you can do. And so just to click into that to give you an idea of what this looks like. So yeah, you'll see all these different labs. So this would be a good one, get started with OCI services. So this is going to cover a lot of the different services that we're focusing on today. But you'll see that you can filter on different labs, beginner, intermediate, advanced. There's different ways you can run the workshop depending on the lab that you're launching. And then you'll see other filters as well, but you can even get as granular as a product. So if you see something today you'd like to focus on, like compute or something, you can go ahead and filter on that. So just clicking on one of these filters real quick. And yeah, so I'll just go ahead and click into one of these labs. So getting started, let's say with Ansible on OCI. just to show you an example lab. So usually there will be a video to give you some background. You will see an outline for what this lab entails, as well as a time estimate and any prerequisites. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's different ways that you can launch this workshop. So you can do it on your own tenancy, or you may have an option to run on Live Labs Sandbox. And even if you don't want to run through this lab in your tenancy, you still can kind of, look through this lab and get some more background if you're interested maybe in Ansible. And then these labs are pretty good about, giving you pictures and step-by-step walking you through how you would do it in OCI. So I just want to highlight this because there's a lot of different services to explore in OCI. And if you ever wanted more hands-on experience, this is a good way to do so. All right, so going back to the console, you can also search right here. So you can, kind of go to these different tabs right here, but you can also search right here. So you can search a resource with a unique identifier or OCID or Oracle Cloud ID. So you can search that here. You can also use the search bar here to search your resources. And then just going back to what Joey showed earlier. So you have your different regions right here. So currently I'm in the Ashburn region. You'll see the different regions available as well. And then if I go to manage region, you also do have the option to subscribe to other regions. So that's where your regions are located or more information. And then you'll see different quick starts right here. So some popular ones like deploying a low code application on autonomous using Apex. So you can explore these different quick starts. Another thing that you'll see on the homepage is launching resources. So, if you want to create a VM instance, set up a load balancer, a lot of the popular launch resources are going to be right here. And then lastly, other ways for, getting started. So introduction to Apex, resource manager. So, as Joey was explaining, this is a way of automating the process of provisioning your infrastructure. There's also an area for key concepts and terminology. So if you want to read up a little bit more on regions and availability domains, you'll have all this kind of information or terminology right here. So yeah, this is the homepage, but where I'm going to be focusing on in this demo is going to be under this identity and security portion right here, because identity is going to be pretty key or foundational to getting started in OCI. And so the first step that you're going to want to do is create your user. So I'm just going to click into that. And you'll see that there's two different types for creating your user. So there's going to be Oracle Identity Cloud Service or IDCS, or you have the option to do an IAM user. And just the difference between the two is with IAM, you're not going to have access to platform services. This is more for emergency admin access. IDCS is going to be more day-to-day, and you're actually going to have access to platform services. So if you want to use Oracle Integration Cloud or Oracle Analytics Cloud, you're going to want to use an IDCS user type. And then you just need to set up things like username, email, first, last name, all this information right here. And then if you already have a group created, you can go ahead and add your user to that group, but also be showing how to create a group if you don't already have one ready. And then just to click into a user, so we have this Vision Corp user right here. So this is a local IAM user. And you can go ahead and do things like edit your user, so description or email, create reset password, things like that, or enable multi-factor authentication, or even more users or more actions like even deleting your user. So you'll see all that information right here. And then once again, you can go ahead and add your user to a group, because remember, you're writing policies to groups to grant access, not to users in OCI. So you need to add your user to a group. So once you've created your user, just going back to groups right here, you can go ahead and create your group. So just give it a name, description. So maybe this is your networking group or something. So you can go ahead and create that. And then just going into one of these groups, once again, you can add users to this group right here. You can also edit the groups, information like that. And then another portion that you'll see right here is identity provider mapped groups or IDP map groups. So you'll see that this group right here is created within OCI, but it's also connected to Oracle Identity Cloud Service as our identity provider. So with IDCS, you can create a map of groups there. You can also log into the identity provider and manage your groups there. All right, so going back to identity. So one thing I would like to cover right here is dynamic groups. So this is going to be pretty similar to groups, but it's going to be for your compute instances or instances that you want to be principal actors, to make API calls to other instances or services in OCI. So it's going to be pretty similar process, name, description, and you'll even see an example right here. And you can choose, to match any rules defined below or match all rules defined below. And you're defining these matching rules for membership in the group. You can also see a rule builder right here. So, instances that match all the following or any of the following, and then you can choose between compartment OCID and instance OCID. So you can choose compartment OCID if you have, multiple instances, or if you can use instance OCID if you want to be a little bit more granular. So that is dynamic groups. All right, so I want to go into policies. So this is where you're actually going to write, grant that access to your groups or define that right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click create policy. So you can give it a name, description right here, and then choose the compartment. And so you'll see that there's a policy builder right here, and you'll see that there's different common policy use cases. So let's see, let's do database management, and you'll see that there are some already pre-written common policy templates that you can leverage. So maybe letting database admins manage database systems or Exadata instances. So you can choose that. You can specify, once again, if it's a group or just going back to dynamic groups, so just specifying which group. And then you can go ahead and select the group as well as the location or the compartment. So this is just common policy templates, but you also do have a manual editor if you want to get maybe a little bit more complex or a little bit more granular with your policies. And you'll see that this policy template carried over. So once again, you're going to say allow groups. So, the Vision Corp group to manage database family and compartment. So the Vision Corp compartment. So that's where you would specify the information there. You also see at the bottom right here, an example of how to write a policy or policy syntax. So once again, you're allowing your group. Remember, your users have to be part of a group. Your users cannot be granted access. They have to be part of a group. So allowing your group to, manage maybe a certain resource types like a database family and a compartment. And you can even get more granular and have a where condition. And if you're ever just curious about, any portion of this example, you can just click into that and it will give you more information on what that looks like. And then I also want to go into compartments because once again, whenever you're creating any resource in OCI, you're going to have to specify which compartment you want it to be located in. So it's just a logical way of grouping your resources. So this is where you would go ahead and create your compartment, name, description, and then just describing that hierarchy right here. So you'll have your root compartment. And that's the highest or overarching level, right here. So you can go ahead and create your compartment. And then I would also like to show federation right here. So you can use another identity provider. So for example, we have IDCS but you can also use, Microsoft Active Directory Federation Service. So you can go ahead and specify that here and set that up. So just fill out all this information. But that's where you can federate your users. And I'll stop right there and see if Joey or Corinne, you want to add anything, or maybe if I missed anything.
I think from my perspective, right, federation with upstream IDPs is fairly common. So if customers on the call have experience with, other cloud providers like AWS, it works very similar in that space. The analogy I use for dynamic groups is it's kind of similar to instance principles and instance roles on AWS as well. though there are some more granular conditions that can be put in place here. And again, compartment boundaries are kind of important there. I think, you know, what you're showing, Olivia, is super important because it shows customers, you know, kind of where I guess the console pages of interest are within OCI, because as you step through this, it's pretty easy to get, you know, kind of, well, what do I need to do? So I appreciate this demo because it kind of shows how you build it from the ground up.
And then once again, you know, just to recap, first creating your users, adding those users to your groups, and then from there, working with your policies. And also you want to be creating your compartments for, you know, where you're going to be creating your resources or how you're organizing your resources. And then also just going back to live labs, if you ever do want to get more hands-on experience, I think we have an IAM lab or labs pertaining to that or identity. You can also filter on the service once again, but maybe it's policies. So right here, or we can also send out a link as well, but you can explore these different labs to get a little bit more familiar with identity access management or just OCI in general, because there was that OCI core services lab, so you can explore that and it goes a little bit more over policies if you have any further questions on that or just want to get more hands-on experience. And with that, I will pass it back to Joey.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for giving everybody a tour of the console. And now we're going to cover a couple of the core infrastructure services here just to show you how we'll begin to actually set up our architecture and begin creating instances within the tenancy. So here on the screen, we're going to talk about networking first off. So networking is going to be one of the first things that you are going to set up within your OCI tenancy, right? You get your users and groups and everything set up. People have the proper permissions to actually create these networking resources. And once you create these networking resources, you'll be able to start provisioning those instances within there. So a virtual cloud network, you're going to see a couple terms on the screen here. These are just some of the important networking services that we want you to be aware of at this point in time. Your virtual cloud network is that customizable private network that you're going to set up within Oracle Cloud Data Centers. It's going to somewhat resemble your traditional network, and you're going to have different pieces that go along with it, like security lists, network security groups. They're going to act as your kind of virtual firewall for these environments. Your virtual cloud networks can be split up or segmented into subnets, which are going to be very useful when you're defining what type of access from a networking perspective you would like these resources to have. So private or public access will be specified within your subnets. You're going to have gateways, a couple different types of gateways depending on your use case and what you would like those resources to do or communicate, how you'd like them to communicate. And we'll talk about those in our Vision Corp architecture in a second. Your load balancer is going to help you distribute traffic in different ways. You're going to have several different algorithms that will help you balance traffic among your different instances and resources. You're going to have access to the Oracle DNS service. So distributed internet system that's going to map those human readable names to the IP addresses. And it's going to be provided in this service that is going to increase performance and resiliency and scalability for DNS zones. And then lastly, there are several different ways in which you connect to OCI. Fast Connect is one of them that is going to be a direct private connection to OCI from your on-premise data center. And there's also other methods like IPsec VPN that you can utilize here as well. So networking, again, foundational, is going to be fundamental to your infrastructure piece. And once we show you what that looks like in our Vision Corp setup, you can see how that could be used in a potential environment. So here we have the resources we've already provisioned within our architecture. And the first thing to note here is our virtual cloud network. So right here, we have our virtual cloud network that spans multiple availability domains, and it's going to be separated into 3 regional subnets. So you could have availability domain specific subnets, and also you can have regional subnets that span multiple availability domains. We have one public subnet here. It's going to be used for our load balancer. And then we have 2 private subnets that will be used for the instances that we'll be provisioning here in a second.
And Joey, just to double click on something you said there that I think is really important, the fact that regional subnets exist do enable sort of some functionality that people think they often have to give up when they move to the cloud. Traditional clustering software often relies on moving a virtual IP to restore service on a standby node in the event of a failure in the primary. So having that ability in OCI gives you the ability to take some of the enterprise applications that leverage that technology to enable failover and translate them directly to the cloud without having to refactor how that works, or put funky things like a bunch of load balancers in front and behind to direct traffic. So I think it really simplifies deployment of maybe some more traditional enterprise applications.
Yeah, that's great insight here too as well. That's the way that this is structured is really for that piece. When we start to provision our instances here, you'll be able to see that with just that single load balancer attached to the one subnet and the ability to actually just distribute it across the availability domains within the same network. So that's a good thing to highlight here. And then also here, we talked about those gateways briefly in the previous slide, but we have a couple here provisioned for the different use cases. So here we have an internet gateway to allow traffic between our virtual cloud network and the internet. We have our NAT gateway down here below, which is going to allow our private network access to the internet, but without assigning each host a public IP address. So then our hosts can make outbound connections to the internet and they can receive responses, but they will not receive any inbound connections. So it's a good use case for like updates and patches and have an extra layer of security that you might need when you don't actually need the inbound connections from the internet. And we also have the service gateway down here on the bottom right, and that will give us access to public OCI services, such as object storage that Creighton mentioned earlier. And you'll be able to do that without using the internet gateway or the NAT gateway. So you have that direct connection to the OCI public services.
So we discussed access more from a user standpoint with users and groups, but what about network access in OCI?
So network access can be done through, we have two different kind of virtual firewalls. You have security lists and network security groups, and you can utilize both of those to specify some of the access to your resources within OCI from a networking standpoint. And that is represented here in this diagram with the shield here on the bottom right of our subnets. And then you also have route tables that will specify how traffic will be routed within your network. So that can be utilized as well to determine where your traffic flows within your network.
Yep, and with that, I think there's a couple of key takeaways. In other cloud providers, for example, the security list is often called an ACL. And so people tend to leave that pretty open and then put more restrictive only allow rules on security groups. In the case of OCI, the rules are the same, stateful, stateless on both, and they can be applied in both. And so it really is, if it's allowed in either, it's allowed. So a common mistake I see customers make is allowing a wide open security list, but putting a more restrictive security group on an instance and then wondering why it's still reachable from the internet. That's generally why, in that case, you'd want to take the security list and make sure that it is as specific as you need it to be.
Very good to point out, because we do get that question a lot. That's the union of the two when you're utilizing both of those within your.
It's a test question for those of you that are studying.
Exactly. Certification's coming up.
I should say a potential test question.
From the test bank, one of it.
Yeah.
And then lastly, here we have that load balancer that we talked about that's going to be distributing traffic to these instances in a variety of ways. You get to choose the algorithm that would best distribute traffic for use case. So that could be like round robin algorithm, least connections. I think IP hash is the other one. So a couple different options you have there. And then lastly, we're going to go through compute, storage, and database real quick. We're just going to show you a couple of the options that you have available to you, as with a lot of other things that we're talking about here, giving you an idea of what they are, and each of them is going to be better used for a specific type of use case. So on the left, right, we have our bare metal and our virtual machine instances. So bare metal, full bare metal server with no noisy neighbors, and it's mainly for your more in performance intensive workloads, or if you do not need a hypervisor, if you want to bring a specific hypervisor, whereas the virtual machine is going to use the hypervisor to virtualize that underlying bare metal server into these smaller VMs that you can run. So you're going to have a lot of flexibility in shape and image, and you can do like smaller sizing with that. Then you have containers and functions, each having their own benefits. Containers are going to be more useful if you are building out applications and leveraging, like I say, microservice-based architecture, right? You can utilize containers for that as well. It's going to be done through our Oracle managed private container registry service. So that's going to be used to help you store and share those container images within OCI. And then functions, the main takeaway for functions is that you're going to be able to deploy these serverless applications that can integrate with a lot of different services without having to worry about that underlying infrastructure or hardware when you're deploying them. So functions will be very useful for that type of use case. And here, quickly just showing for our Vision Corp architecture, we have deployed 2 compute instances. They're both going to be virtual machines. One is within AD2 and one is within AD3, and our load balancer will be connected to both of them to distribute traffic. And then for storage, we're going to have some options here as well, depending on your use case. You're going to have a couple of different types that we're going to highlight today. And just from left to right here as well, you have local NVMe and local NVMe SSD. So that's going to provide you with the fastest performance for your more transactional database and HPC use cases. File storage, if you need a file storage system, we have the managed file storage service that can scale up to exabytes. So it's really ideal for your enterprise applications, big data, container-based applications as well. You have block storage after that. It's going to be very flexible for your application development and deployment and for your classic tiered applications as well. And then lastly, on the far right, we have object storage and archive storage. So object storage is sometimes referred to as hot storage, archive storage as cold storage. They are both going to allow you to store basically an unlimited amount of unstructured data. So lots of the different files that you'll need access to. Object storage is going to be retrieved immediately, whereas archive storage is going to be more for long-term data storage. It's going to be a lot cheaper than object storage, but that data is going to have to be restored before you're going to have to retrieve it. So just a quick delineation there between the two. And showing here, we have object storage deployed, and that's connected through our service gateway here so that we can access object storage with our instances without going through our NAT gateway or internet gateway. And then the last piece we are going to cover, and we can get into some of those questions we have at the end here, is Oracle database. So we have several different database options depending on the level of manageability that you would like to use. So ranging from customer managed databases on the left, like Oracle database on compute, all the way over to fully managed database solutions like the autonomous database systems right here as well. So you have autonomous data warehouse and autonomous transaction processing. And the difference here, again, is the amount of manageability handled by Oracle and the level of granularity and customization you have for managing the database system down on the lower on the left. So database on compute, you're going to have a lot of different tools at your disposal that you'll use to manage it, right? The API, different command lines. You could use Enterprise Manager or SQL Developer, for example. Semi-managed database cloud service and Exadata. So you have access to all of those features needed to build your applications and increase productivity. So you'll have some self-service database provisioning and lifecycle automation, but not going to be as fully managed as our services here on the right, which is autonomous database. And that would be including automated scalability, automated patching. It's going to be in 2 different flavors as well. So autonomous data warehouse going to be more analytics heavy workloads, ATP more from your transactional workloads. So you have all of these different types of services at your disposal depending on your use case here as well. And here we are utilizing an autonomous database instance connected to our Oracle Analytics Cloud service. So we have a lot of past services available for this architecture. We are just utilizing the Analytics Cloud service to get insights from our application with autonomous database as our storage or as our data source within Oracle Analytics Cloud. So this refers back to the architecture that we had at the beginning that we built out throughout the presentation. And I know we went through a lot of services today. We do have a couple minutes left for some of those Q&A pieces that we didn't get to throughout the presentation. I saw a lot of that was getting answered in the chat. So if there's any maybe that Larry or Creighton, if you have seen any that you would like to bring up here, we could do that now within the question and answer section.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I think there were a lot of questions regarding interacting with services outside of the console. And so, there were a lot of questions that I answered with links to SDKs for the various languages that are supported and or specific API actions. But also the CLI has something called Show OCI in it. And so there's a lot of questions about how do I go look at specific resources. So you can look at calling individual APIs for specific services. So for example, OCI compute instance list, right, will tell you all the instances in a specific compartment, and that's usually the filter. You can do that with the CLI. You can call respective APIs for that as well. But also if you want to look kind of holistically at the environment, Show OCI, which is available on GitHub, and I'm told is now integrated into the OCI CLI, can kind of provide a very high level view of all of the resources in your tenancy. So that helps quite a bit. I think that was one of the common ones. I don't know, Larry, if you've got anything else.
Yeah, I think that was the main ones, but there's a couple interesting questions in here. I think the questions that we currently have. So if we haven't answered your question, we are going to review these and we'll post answers afterwards. Because there's a few of these that I have to dig into, but I can kind of go through these and bring out the questions so everybody sees them. One of the first ones, I know it happened early on in this, and Creighton, you might have an answer for this one. And it kind of goes along with what you're saying. How to extract policy details, like a policy report, and understand which group has what kind of access to OCI resources. I think partially CLI, but it'd just be looking at the group in the console. Creighton, do you know of anything that can just show all the policies assigned to a group?
I'm not aware of anything that can do that dynamically. I've used Show OCI to dump all that stuff before, but what I've had to do in the past is write a script to do, Python API calls to show all of the policies that are assigned to a specific compartment, and then kind of munge them all together. So I think that might be something that following up on would be beneficial because it's a fairly common problem.
Yeah, awesome. All right, let's look at one of these. So for IaaS, does Oracle own the physical infrastructure, or does it sublet from other providers? To the best of my knowledge, we own all of our physical infrastructure. It's something that we deploy this, in single ADs, or we deploy this in multiple ADs in different regions. And a lot of it has to do with customer demand in that location as to what gets deployed. Creighton, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I also think that it's important to note in that particular scenario that, we do have kind of an even price list across the globe. So any of the regions where we build and deploy those things out, the price to customers are the same from a resource perspective. That's another key takeaway that I don't think we talk about quite as often or quite as much as we should.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and I think we're at time. So for the other questions, we'll take a look at these and we'll gather some answers and then we'll get them posted a little bit later on. So thank you all for joining. This has been awesome to have Joey, Olivia, and Creighton here, and they'll be here, same time in about a week. And we'll be talking about our next topic, which is going to be business and governance administration. So looking forward to having you all here.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Joey, Olivia, Creighton, Larry, for kicking off this session, season 3 of Day One and Beyond series. It was a great session, like the conversation between the presenters. I'm sure everyone had a great learning experience. The replay and the PDF for this event will be available within 24 hours and on the community, Customer Connect community. Feel free to share the links with your friends and colleagues. And like Larry mentioned, there are more sessions in the series, and I hope that everyone can join us again. Next one is in 2 weeks on October 4th, and we'll have many more this year. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.